The first sound that ever stayed with me was not my mistress's voice, nor the crack of the whip, nor even the wails of the fields at dawn. It was the whisper of the bayou at night. People think water is silent, but not in Louisiana. The bayou carries its own language, soft and low, a kind of song that comes from the way the wind presses through the moss and the way the water laps against roots as old as time. When I was a child, I would lie awake on the pallet in the slave quarters, the air heavy with sweat, listening to it. It was never just water to me. It was alive, filled with things unseen, and sometimes I swore it was speaking to me. I belonged to the plantation the way a fence post belongs to the soil. Born here, bound here, never asked if I wanted to stay. My mistress was a woman of lace and temper, sharp as the needles she used to hem her dresses. She thought herself delicate like porcelain, but her cruelty was heavy as iron, her tongue cut deeper than any blade, and her hand was always ready to strike. Each morning I combed her hair, standing behind her as she sat before her mirror. Her golden locks shone in the light that poured through the window, while my own hair remained tangled and rough, hidden beneath a rag. She would hiss at me if I pulled too hard, even though my hands moved softer than the petals of magnolias. To her I was not a girl, not a soul. I was a tool, to be worked until it dulled, and then discarded. But though she never saw me, I saw her. I saw the way her eyes lingered on her reflection, as if she feared what the mirror would show. I saw the way she pressed powder to her face to hide lines that deepened with each year. I noticed her trembling hands when she thought herself alone. Power, I realized, was her disguise. Beneath it, she was fragile, and that fragile woman believed she owned me. The others on the plantation carried their silence like armor. They endured. Some whispered prayers, others bowed their heads. But something restless burned in me, a question I could never swallow. Why should she command me? Why must my pain feed her comfort? That question grew sharper each time her words lashed across me. Each time her laughter rose when my dress tore. Each time I bent my back to serve her vanity. And at night, when her voice no longer filled my ears, I returned to the whispers of the bayou. The swamp was a different world after dark. The air was thick with mist, rolling low like smoke. Cypress trees stretched their arms overhead, their roots twisted like the bones of giants. Frogs croaked, owls called, and sometimes the water rippled, though no wind touched it. I used to stand there, still as stone, and wonder if something inside that water was watching me back. The elders used to tell stories before work and hunger drained their voices. Stories of spirits carried over the ocean, of gods who listened, of charms that could bend the will of another. They warned us never to call unless we were ready to answer. I was a child then, but their words stayed with me like seeds buried in soil, waiting. It was in those nights by the swamp that the seeds sprouted. I began to believe the whispers I heard were not just my imagination. They were invitations. The bayou was daring me, coaxing me to listen closer. Sometimes I thought I heard names in the rustle of reeds. Sometimes in the still water I glimpsed faces, faint and fleeting. Whether it was real or only the shadows of my mind, I cannot say. But I know this, I never felt alone there. One evening, when the moon lay thin as a silver blade, I hummed an old song I remembered hearing once. It was not in English, it was older, heavier. My voice trembled at first, but the sound seemed to sink into the mist. The frogs stopped croaking. The night air grew colder. And in that silence I felt something stir. I had no proof, no sign anyone else would believe. But in my heart, I knew the bayou had heard me. The next morning, as I combed her hair, my mistress complained louder than usual. She struck me twice across the hand for nothing more than breathing too close. The sting faded, but the anger did not. And when I caught my own reflection in the mirror beside hers, I did not see only a girl of tired eyes and chapped hands. I saw something else, a flicker, a spark. Her hair was not only hair, it was part of her, carrying her essence. Her clothes, her sweat, her discarded scraps, these were trails of her soul, pieces that tied her to this world. I remembered the stories of charms made from such things, stories whispered by the elders when they thought we children were not listening. My mistress thought herself untouchable, but I had touched her every day, comb in hand, gathering the very pieces she left behind. That night, I sat again at the swamp's edge. The mist clung tighter, the water darker. I whispered into the air, soft, almost afraid. If you hear me, take this pain and return it to her. My words vanished into the fog, but a ripple spread across the still water. My heart hammered in my chest. Coincidence, I told myself. Just coincidence. But belief is a strange thing. Once you let it in, it grows. I returned to the quarters with a shiver. I could not shake. Sleep would not come. The whispers of the bayou followed me, echoing inside my skull. And for the first time, I wondered if my pain was no longer mine alone. Perhaps the swamp had taken it. Perhaps it was already making its way back to her. She thought she owned me, but that night, as I closed my eyes and heard her restless footsteps above, I began to think perhaps she was already mine. It was not books that taught me. The masters kept books like locked chests, and law called people like me property. My lessons came from the edges of light, from the old women who moved through shadows. One of them lived beneath a sagging porch, wrapped in a shawl. Children called her mad, and crossed to the other side of the road when she sat by the well. The women in the quarters gave her scraps and warm broth, and when she spoke, even the dogs stopped. She let me sit at her feet once when I was small, and showed me how hands could pull meaning from plants. She crushed leaves until oil bled out and rubbed the pulp until the air filled with scent. She taught me which roots drew stubbornness and which leaves eased fever. Once she wrapped a fallen feather in red thread and a child's fever broke. It was not miracle always. Sometimes the world stayed stubborn, but her hands moved in patterns that left marks. You listen, she told me on a night when the moon was a bright coin, that the ocean kept our names and the land keeps our bones. We do not lose what our mothers knew. Fold it into your bones. Her voice was small and steady, like a river under ice. She taught me fragments more than full rituals. A pinch of rue, the way to tie a knot so a thought could rest inside it, the method to hide a thread inside a seam, so it traveled with a garment. She taught me to read what others threw away. Hair and a comb, a scrap of lace, a thread from a seam. Those pieces carry the song of a life, she said. Hold a piece and you hold their trace. At first I collected things like a child hides bright stones. A golden lock that clung to the comb, a button from a dress I was not allowed to wear, the scent on a handkerchief. I kept them secret, folded in the hem of a skirt. Belief came slowly. I lit a small coal in a tin crushed rue until my eyes stung and placed a lock of her hair on a flat stone. I said the words the old woman had taught me, soft and careful. I did not expect thunder or an answering voice. I asked only that the night listen to my hurt. The next day, the mistress complained of a pain that made her wince. She said she had slept wrong. The doctor fussed and gave powders that left her hollow, but the ache did not vanish. I told myself coincidence, but the seed had been planted. Small things gather like water in a hollow. The work demanded patience. The old woman told me, you cannot pull a vine and expect the root to loosen. You must temper force with time. So I learned to move like the swamp, slow, persistent, patient. I learned when to speak a name and when to keep silence, how to fold a scrap so intent stayed inside it, how to press a fingernail into wet clay to leave a path a spirit might follow. I learned to listen for replies and the small signs, a heron taking flight at dawn, a lantern guttering, a dog whining at a corner no one saw. Those were the language the old woman had spoken of, the small disturbances that meant the world had heard. Power was not always thunderous. Often it was like water, deep, slow, wearing away. It arrived as nightmares that would not leave, as faint aches a doctor could not name, as a dread that settled behind the eyes. Those small shifts changed lives more surely than panic. I hid my work because discovery meant ruin. The masters feared what they could not touch. A whisper of witchcraft could cost someone their life, or worse, bring ruin to a whole family. The old woman taught me concealment. Tuck a hair into a buttonhole, fold a thread into a seam, press a scrap under a plant in the yard. Hide it in plain sight where no one expects a secret. As my skill grew, so did my courage. The idea that a life could be nudged by a handful of hair and a whispered name made the world feel less absolute. The mistress who smoothed her skirts before the mirror began to look like a woman made of parts anyone could touch. I still feared her. I still feared the lash and the power she held. But I no longer felt wholly small, and there was a warning. The old woman watched my eyes and told me that the taste of bending the world is dangerous. Or once you see it move, she said, you will hunger. She spoke of appetite with the same voice she used for recipes and remedies. She warned that spells can turn inward, that the needle that finds the other may sooner find you. I listened and kept my hands steady. But hunger is patient, and so am I, only up to a point. Knowledge had altered the shape of my days. I stitched names into knots, folded intention into cloth, and listened as the swamp answered in small, creeping ways. It taught me to turn my sorrow into something the world could not ignore. And once you learn that voice, the question becomes when to use it, not if. The hunger returned like tide water, and I felt it as a pull. Each small success fed the thought that my hands were instruments of change, that the scraps I kept could be keys. I began to imagine outcomes, to measure hurts and reckon what justice might look like if measured in quiet things. Still, I remember the old woman's warning and braided it into every charm I made. Half stubbornness, half reverence, I carried on. The swamp's whispers had taught me that power often comes in increments. That truth changed everything. It happened on a day so hot the air shimmered, and even the fields seemed to breathe slow. My mistress sat before her mirror, fan in hand, smoothing her skirts with a practiced motion that made me think of a woman arranging armor. She watched her reflection as if the mirror might tell her whether she still held power. I worked behind her, fingers careful with the comb. Her hair felt like silken sun, and in those strands I saw both her vanity and the small, soft things she thought she kept far from harm. Her temper was quick and thin as glass. A word, a flick of a wrist, and a person's hour could break. That afternoon her voice rose sharp. "Slow," she snapped. "You fumble." I kept my hands steady. I had learned to make calm look like obedience. Still, shame makes one vulnerable, and when she struck me across the cheek, it felt as if the air itself had split. The pain flared, a clean white lightning in my chest, and all the small cruelties of years stacked heavy behind it. She turned back to her mirror without looking, as if nothing had happened, and I felt something inside me shift. That night I sat in the corner of the quarters with a scrap of cloth and a lock of her hair I had hidden in my hem. The hair was a ribbon of light and felt wrong to hold. My hands were unsteady but steady enough to form a small shape. I shaped a crude figure from rags and mud, pressing the strand into its head. I tied it closed and breathed on the fibers until my breath felt like a binding. The doll was ugly and honest and small, the sort of thing a child might make, and yet heavy with intention. The old woman had taught me to warm a charm with breath, to press an intent into its cloth until the world could read the thought. I whispered words I barely remembered, words that felt like the bones of older songs. I did not call for thunder. I asked only that the mistress feel a measure of the pain she had given. Then I took a needle, long, thin, cold as river stone, and pushed it into the rag where a wound would be. A cry tore through the house as if cloth had been shredded. Lamps flickered. Doors slammed in the halls. I clutched the door and sat very still, my heart an animal caged. In the morning, the mistress moved like someone padded with a hidden weight. She placed a hand to her side, though no bruise showed. She told the doctor she had dreamt of being strangled by her dress. The doctor scribbled notes and offered powders, calling it nerves. Still the color left her cheeks day by day. At first the satisfaction that came was small and secret. I told myself it was justice and not cruelty. Trudy. She had not been killed, only made to feel. The sound she had made in the night sat like a small reckoning in my chest. I watched her through the day like someone observing a troubled tide, noting how she started to flinch at small noises and how she crossed herself more often than before. The house itself felt wary, as if the walls had learned to listen, but with each small success came a hollowness. Revenge tasted like ash sweetened with sugar. There were nights I watched her sleep, and pity rose like a bitter thing I could not spit out. She had been a hand and a voice and a boot all of my life, but that did not stop her from being fragile under the skin. Memory of my mother, memory of my own smallness, made me realize that to make another suffer was to rearrange my own shape, too. I fed the doll as the old woman had taught, a scrap folded into its chest, a pinch of crushed herb, a thread tied into its hem. Each small ritual seemed to turn another key. The mistress's nights worsened, waking with sweat, seeing shapes on white walls, feeling a weight on her chest. Servants muttered of curses. The preacher crossed himself in the hallway. Fear spread through the household like wind through dry grass. Rumor moves faster than truth. Whispers of witchcraft threaded between the quarters and the kitchens. The mistress began to carry a rosary and to press her lips to it as if the beads could ward off the thing I had called. Some servants refused the big house at night. Others muttered prayers as they passed the room where she slept. Piety wrapped around her like a thin, desperate cloak. The old woman had warned me that the taste of power invites appetite. Careful, she said, tapping ash from a pipe like a metronome. The world will ask for payment. I felt that pull in the night, a craving for another small correction, another minor justice, a tapping ash from a pipe like a metronome. Each time I fed it, the hunger came back with a colder edge, and still the needle's song had altered the order. The mistress no longer paced her yard like a queen. She moved like someone who feared shadows had teeth. For a while the quarters breathed softer, as if the mere act of air might keep the spell fed. Yet I held the rag and watched how the threads between us tightened. I had taken a piece of her life and bound my nights to it. There was no being only a hand that combed hair anymore. The house had rearranged itself around a small, dangerous answer, and the answer would not let us go. I had not meant for the world to change so quickly. I thought spells slow, like moss on stone, not sudden as a snapped reed, but anger moves fast, and once it trusts your hands, it races. After the night with the needle, the dark felt different. The swamp leaned toward the house. Frogs stopped singing. Crickets hushed. I told myself I saw patterns where none were, but my hands shook when I thought of the rag. I wanted more than small revenge. The old woman showed me how to bind a life with more than thread, how to fold intent into things so the world would read them. We gathered items, a lock of the mistress's hair, a scrap from her chemise, a pinch of river clay warmed in my palm. She taught me to rim a flat stone with salt and set the pieces within. A small work makes big change, she said. I wrapped the hair 3 times around the doll's head and tied a tight knot. I ran a thin pin along the cloth and pressed the point as if writing a name. I placed the rag in the salt circle and lit a coal until smoke curled like a sigh. My breath was shallow. My breath was shallow. I whispered words older than my life, not asking for death but for a measure of the pain she had given. That night I dreamed of rooms with no doors, of a woman who could not find air. In the morning the house felt heavy, the light dim as if caution sat on the window ledges. When the mistress cried out, I was mending by the hearth. Her shout cut across the yard, sharp, surprised, threaded with fear. She clutched her side. The doctor came and frowned, offering powders and talk of nerves. The mistress spoke of being pinched awake by a pressure at her ribs. The ache lingered. I watched her with new eyes. She walked with a quick glance to corners where no one stood. She crossed herself more often, fingers fumbling at the rosary she now wore. The house followed her fear. Servants stepped softly and spoke in whispers. Conversations drifted to curses and prayer. Inside me, pride and shame wrestled. The wound she felt was not brutal, yet her fear warmed me like cold. But pity rose too, bitter and unwanted. She had been cruel, but she could still tremble. The contradiction unsettled me more than the small triumph pleased me. Rumors spread. Some blamed food, some blamed the weather. The preacher muttered about sin. The old woman's warning returned to me. Don't stay too long. Magic feeds on attention. I saw how small things grew when watched. Her condition changed in odd ways. The ache came and went like tide. She claimed to see a dark shape at the foot of her bed. Mirrors fogged where no breath had touched them. A corner of the parlor seemed colder, though sun beat warm outside. She pressed a charm beneath her dress and clutched it like an anchor. I learned to read small signs. A cup sliding an inch on a table without a hand, a gust that moved no curtain, bread left untouched, the world rearranged in small shifts, and the pattern mattered more than the cause. Was this my work or the swamp's answer? The line blurred. With each sign my appetite tightened. Power asks for more. The old woman watched me sometimes and kept silence. Her look was warning enough. I learned to twist thread with different pressure, to add a herb to the coals, to whisper a name 1 tone lower. Each slight change sent a thought further. Fear tightened the household. Heads turned when I passed. A servant crossed to avoid me. The preacher's eyes lingered. The big house closed doors it had once opened wide. I had altered the balance and was not sure of the cost. Days turned as slow as molasses after that. The mistress's sleep broke into jagged pieces. She rose pale and restless and walked the halls in thin slippers, holding a lamp with hands that shook. Once I saw her press her face into a pillow and weep without sound. The sight surprised me. So used I was to her hardness that her weakness felt like thunder. I told myself that compassion would soften nothing, that she had sown cruelty and must reap its weight, and yet the image of her weeping lodged in the place behind my ribs where memory keeps its sharp things. The old woman visited less often, and when she did, she paused at the edge of the quarters and watched us like one who counts the cost. "You did not make a monster," she said once, voice soft as ash. "You taught the world to remember the balance, but remember also, balance has to be tended. Do not let it grow roots that choke your own feet." Her words sank into me like pebble into pond, making ripples I could not soothe. I began to plan with the care of a thief. Small alterations at first, tucking an extra thread under a seam, slipping a pinch of herb into stew when the cook was not looking. Each act felt like learning to breathe differently. Yes, the first pin slid through cloth as if the rag were flesh. I whispered her name as I pressed it down, the syllables breaking apart in my mouth like river stones. My hand trembled, not from fear alone, but from the weight of what I had begun. The doll was small, no bigger than my palm, patched together from scraps and clay, but it sat heavier than any burden I had carried before. In its chest lay strands of her golden hair. Around its body were threads pulled from her gowns. Inside it was the ache of my breath and the echo of my voice. When the pin pierced, the shutters banged against the house, though the night was still. Somewhere above, she screamed. It was sharp, quick, a cry of shock more than pain, but it rolled through the big house like thunder. I froze, pin in hand, heart hammering, unsure if I had imagined the sound. Then came footsteps, servants rushing, doors opening, whispers swelling into panic. I hid the doll beneath the floorboard and lay still on my pallet, eyes wide, ears strained. The swamp outside hummed frogs, but the sound carried a mocking edge, as though the night itself laughed at me. In the morning, she appeared in the parlor, pale and trembling, her arm bound in a sling. She claimed she had slipped and struck herself against the bed frame, but her eyes darted too quickly, her voice quivered too much. I stood behind her as always, comb in hand, watching the way her reflection trembled in the mirror. Each time the comb brushed her scalp, she flinched. She muttered prayers beneath her breath, prayers she had never bothered with before. The preacher came that evening, summoned in haste. He sprinkled holy water through the halls, his hand shaking as he clutched a cross. He recited psalms with such force his voice cracked, but I saw the doubt in his eyes. He believed in heaven, yes, but he feared the swamp. He feared the whispers that crawled through the cracks of the big house. The mistress clutched her rosary as if it were her lifeline. Her fingers worked over the beads so often that the skin between them reddened and split. At night I heard her whispering Hail Marys, her voice thick with tears. She prayed to her God for protection, but she did not know the truth. It was not the devil she feared. It was me, the servants noticed too. They spoke of curses in hushed tones, their voices trembling. Some said the lady of the house had angered the Lord with her pride. Others claimed a witch's hand had reached into her bed. A few looked at me longer than they should have, their gazes sharp with suspicion. I lowered my eyes, kept my face still, but inside fire burned. Each night I returned to the doll. My hands itched for the pins, though fear lingered in my chest. I told myself I would not go too far. The old woman's words haunted me. Magic spreads like roots. What you plant may crack the ground beneath your own feet. I pressed the pins lightly, never deep, just enough to make her ache, to unsettle her, to feed her fear. And each time she weakened, her steps slowed, her eyes hollowed. She grew thinner, as though something fed on her while she slept. I should have felt guilt. Instead, I felt strength. For the first time, her cruelty did not sit on me like a chain. For the first time, I held a measure of power. Still, I was not blind to the danger. The swamp had started to answer me in ways I could not deny. The whispers grew louder, clearer. Sometimes, as I bent over the doll, I heard laughter in the rustle of reeds outside. Sometimes, the candlelight flickered without draught. Once, I woke to find the doll lying outside its hiding place, though I had tucked it away with care. I told myself I must be imagining things, but my heart knew better. The swamp had taken notice. It had stretched its fingers into the big house, and it would not let go easily. One evening, as I pushed a pin through the doll's shoulder, the mistress's scream echoed down the hall, louder than before, filled with raw terror. I froze, needle halfway in, sweat pouring down my temples. The scream cut off abruptly, replaced by sobs, and I pulled the pin free in a rush. The doll seemed to sigh, its cloth body softening in my hand. I pressed it back beneath the floorboard, heart pounding, breath ragged. My hands shook too badly to sleep that night. When dawn came, I moved through the day with hollow eyes, waiting for a sign I had gone too far. But she was still alive. Weaker, yes, frightened, yes, but alive. Her eyes darted like a bird trapped in a cage. She flinched at shadows. She refused to eat, claiming the food tasted of ash. And though I pitied her in fleeting moments, the fire in me said she had earned every tear. Still, I could not ignore the truth. Each pin tied me tighter to her. Each whisper pulled me closer to the swamp. And deep down I knew the line between punishment and destruction grew thinner with every breath I took. The big house had always stood like a monument, tall and white against the swamp, its windows gleaming like watchful eyes. To the outside world it was strength, order, and wealth. But inside I began to notice the cracks. Shadows clung to the corners longer than they should have. Candles guttered without wind. The very walls seemed to exhale unease. The mistress no longer glided through the halls as a queen surveying her kingdom. She shuffled, her steps quick, her head turning sharply as though she expected something behind her. Her vanity no longer gave her comfort. The mirror, once her throne, became her enemy. She stared into it with fear, as if another face might look back. I watched her closely. Her skin grew pale, her cheeks hollow. She wore shawls even in the heat, claiming the air chilled her bones. She prayed constantly. Her rosary clicked between her fingers morning and night, a ceaseless litany of whispered pleas. And though I stood behind her as always, comb in hand, I knew it was not God she feared. It was the unseen thing pressing against her life. It was the spell in my floorboard. The doll had grown heavier. Each night when I held it, it seemed to pulse faintly, as though it had a heartbeat of its own. I stuffed it with dried herbs, sage for cleansing, rue for sharpness, wormwood for binding. The scent of them clung to my skin. My fingers itched when I touched the pins. The cloth yielded easily now, as if it welcomed each prick. But fear rode beside my pride. I told myself I was still in control, that I decided when and how much she suffered. Yet more and more often, the swamp answered in ways I had not asked. A gust of wind sweeping through a closed room. A knock at the door when no one stood outside. Once, as I bent over the doll, the candle beside me flared so high, I thought the flame would consume me. The servants noticed the changes. They whispered in the kitchen, their voices thin and trembling. Some claimed the mistress saw shadows moving at night. Others swore they felt hands brush their arms in empty halls. One swore she saw a pale figure standing on the stair landing, vanishing when the lantern light reached it. Rumor spread faster than truth. Fear rooted itself in every corner of the house. The preacher came again, summoned with haste. This time he carried a larger cross. Its wood rough and dark, as though size alone could drive away what lingered. He sprinkled holy water at every doorway, muttering prayers louder than before. His voice broke on the psalms. Sweat ran down his face, though the air was cool. The mistress clung to his sleeve, begging him to stay to protect her. But I saw the truth in his eyes, fear, not faith. Even he felt the house shifting under some unseen hand. At night, I lay on my pallet and listened. The swamp whispered as it always had, but now it seemed the big house whispered too. Floorboards creaked with no weight. The windows rattled, though the air was still. Once, I woke to the sound of scratching beneath me, soft at first, then louder, as if claws dragged across the wood. My breath caught to be said. I pressed my hands over my ears, but the sound pushed through, relentless. When I dared to lift the board and touch the doll, it felt warm, alive, as though it had been waiting. I began to wonder if I had stirred more than I intended. The old woman's words haunted me. Do not plant what you cannot tend. Roots grow wild. Perhaps my spell had taken on a life of its own, fed not only by my anger, but by the fear that now saturated the house. Every prayer, every whisper of curse, every sideways glance from a servant, they were all threads tightening the knot. The mistress grew weaker by the day. She ate little, slept less. Her eyes carried deep shadows. Her once loud commands softened to hoarse whispers. She still struck out sometimes, lashing with words, but the blows rang hollow. She was breaking, piece by piece, and the doll in my floorboard sang with it. And yet pity returned to me in fleeting moments. One night I passed her door and heard sobs muffled by a pillow. Not the sharp cries of rage I had known, but the helpless weeping of a woman unraveling. I froze, torn between triumph and sorrow. Had I become like her, taking comfort in another's tears? Or was I balancing scales no one else dared to touch? I tried to quiet my thoughts by working the doll again. I whispered her name, pressed a pin into its leg. Somewhere in the house a crash rang out, followed by her scream. But this time it was not just hers. Other voices joined, a servant shouting, another crying. Fear rolled through the house like a tide. I pulled a pin free, my heart pounding, sweat slicking my skin. The doll lay still in my hand, but the air around me pulsed, thick and alive. I realized then that the house itself had changed. It was no longer only the mistress's domain. It had become the swamp's. My whispers had opened the door, and something larger had stepped through. From that night, I moved through the halls with caution. I was not the only one watching her anymore. The walls themselves seemed to lean closer. The air carried weight. The shadows moved even when I stood still. And though I told myself I had meant only to punish, I knew deep down that punishment had grown teeth. The mistress clung to her rosary, to her prayers, to her preacher. But none of those could shield her from the swamp, and I, the girl she had struck and mocked, had become both her tormentor and her witness. The power I held was no longer only mine. It belonged to something older, something patient, something that would not rest until it was satisfied. And I began to fear that satisfaction might demand more than I had ever planned to give. The mistress began to fall apart before my very eyes. At first it was small, a shiver when no breeze passed, a shadow flickering across her mirror when no one else was in the room. She told herself these were tricks of the mind, but her eyes betrayed her. They darted quickly, as if she feared to catch sight of what might be waiting just outside her vision. Her proud posture wilted. She no longer walked with her chin lifted high, looking down on everyone else. Instead, she stooped, shoulders hunched, clutching at the walls as though she needed them to hold her up. The woman who once ordered me about like a queen now muttered prayers as if she were a beggar pleading for scraps. The servants noticed the change too. Their gossip ran wild, weaving stories of curses and spirits. Some said she was haunted by the ghosts of those who had suffered under her cruelty. Others whispered that the swamp itself had laid claim to her. A few dared to suggest that someone in the house Someone close had placed a hand upon her soul. Their eyes lingered on me a moment, too long before they looked away. I stayed silent, but inside me, two voices wrestled. One whispered triumph, reminding me of every cruel word, every slap across my face, every humiliation she had poured over me like dirty water. The other whispered caution, warning that what I had unleashed was not so easily contained. The doll beneath my floorboard grew heavier each night, as though it soaked up her fear, her sickness, her unraveling mind. When I touched it, it throbbed faintly against my palm, alive in a way it should not have been. The preacher returned more often now. He carried holy water in small bottles, sprinkling it over every doorway. He spoke prayers louder, his voice rising until it cracked. Sweat gleamed on his brow. He avoided my eyes when I passed him, as if he sensed something clinging to me. The mistress clung to him like a drowning woman clings to driftwood, but faith cannot shield against what seeps from the swamp. One night, I crept near her chamber and listened. Her voice shook through the heavy door. "Deliver me," she whispered over and over. "Deliver me from evil. Deliver me from what hunts me." Then came the sound of sobbing, soft and desperate. I pressed my ear to the wood and almost pitied her. Almost. The next morning, her reflection startled me. She sat before the mirror, but the face staring back looked decades older. Her skin was pallid, her cheeks hollow, her lips cracked. She looked like a ghost of herself, a shadow wearing her dress. When my comb snagged lightly in her hair, she shrieked and slapped my hand away. "Careless," she snapped, but the force was gone from her voice. It was not command, it was fear. She had begun to refuse food. Plates of fine meats and breads went untouched, left to rot until the servants carried them away. She claimed the food tasted foul, poisoned. She drank little, only water blessed by the preacher. Her body weakened, her steps faltered. Once, she fainted in the hall, and it took 2 servants to carry her back to bed. The house itself seemed to bend with her. Doors groaned louder on their hinges. Lamps flickered no matter how much oil was fed to them. Servants avoided the mistress's rooms, claiming they felt watched when they stepped inside. One girl swore she heard laughter echoing from the walls, though no one else was there. The more she unraveled, the more I felt the swamp inside me. Its whispers grew clear, no longer just rustles and sighs. Sometimes it spoke words, faint but distinct. "More," it said. "More." At times I thought it was only my own hunger echoing back at me. But other times I knew it was something beyond me, something older, something that had waited for someone bold or foolish enough to open the door. The doll became my secret altar. Each night I held it close, whispering my pain into its cloth body. I pressed pins through its limbs, through its chest, careful not to push too deep, telling myself I sought balance, not destruction. Yet every scream from the mistress made my breath quicken, every sob tightened the fire in my chest. I feared what I was becoming even as I reveled in it. One evening, as dusk bled into night, I saw her standing in the garden. Her dress hung loose on her frail frame. Her hands shook as she clutched the rosary. She turned her face skyward and cried out, "Why have you forsaken me?" Her voice cracked, raw, almost inhuman. For a moment, she looked less like a woman and more like a broken marionette, strings cut, staggering under invisible weight. The servants gathered at the windows whispering. Some crossed themselves, others shook their heads. I stood behind them, silent, heart-thudding. I had wanted her broken. I had wanted her afraid. But now, watching her crumble beneath the weight of her fear, I felt the swamp pressing on me, demanding I decide. Would I stop, or would I give it more? That night, I dreamed of the doll walking on its own, its ragged feet padding across the floor. I woke with a start, sweat soaking my dress, the floorboard warm beneath me. I pressed my palm against it, and for a moment I could swear something pressed back. The mistress unraveled more each day. Her prayers turned to screams. Her strength melted away until she was little more than bone and shadow. The house grew colder. The servants whispered of leaving, of fleeing the cursed land. But we were all bound here, by chains, by fear, by hunger. The swamp had sunk its roots too deep. And I, the girl who once only combed her mistress's hair, now held a choice heavier than any chain. I had awakened something. I had tied my life to hers with pins and whispers, and as she unraveled, thread by thread, I began to see that the same thread wound tightly around me. The question pressed on me like a weight I could not shake. If she came undone completely, what would happen to me? The doll no longer felt like cloth and clay. It pulsed in my hand, faint but steady, as though it carried a heartbeat not its own. When I lifted the floorboard and brought it into the lamplight, its stitched face seemed to watch me. I knew it was nothing but scraps, yet each night it grew heavier, warmer, more alive. I had made it to bind my mistress, to return her cruelty back upon her. But now, I feared the binding went both ways. Each time she screamed in the night, my own chest ached. Each time she clawed at her sheets in terror, I woke drenched in sweat, breathless as if I had run for miles. I could no longer tell where her suffering ended. Still I could not let it go. Power is a hunger once tasted and deep. I pressed pins into its arms, its legs, its chest, whispering her name with every thrust. Sometimes I withdrew them quickly, afraid of going too far. Other times anger burned hotter, and I pushed harder, daring the swamp to answer. And it always did. The house grew restless. Doors slammed in the night. Shadows shifted across the walls, though no light moved. The servants whispered of footsteps echoing through empty halls, of cold hands brushing their shoulders. A maid swore she saw the doll itself, standing at the edge of her bed, its head tilting, its stitches grinning. When she woke screaming, I lay still, my heart thudding, the doll hidden beneath my floorboard. Could the others see it too? Had my secret slipped free of my hands? I told myself she had only dreamed, but doubt gnawed at me. The swamp did not care for secrets. It thrived on fear, and fear had filled every corner of the big house. One night I woke to the sound of scratching, not beneath the floorboard this time, but beside my bed. My breath caught. Slowly, I lit the stub of a candle. In the flickering glow, the floorboard where I hid the doll bulged upward, as though something beneath pressed against it. I reached out with trembling fingers, lifted the wood, and there it was, lying still, yet warmer than fire. I touched its cloth body, and for the first time I felt it twitch. Not a shift of my imagination, not the tremor of my hand. The doll moved, only slightly, but enough to send fear slicing through me. I snatched my hand back, heart racing. Yet when I looked again, it lay still, stitches rough, clay brittle. The next day, the mistress refused to leave her bed. She claimed a figure stood at the foot of it all night, watching her with dark, empty eyes. She swore it whispered her name. The preacher came again, muttering louder than ever, sprinkling holy water until the boards gleamed. He warned of devils, of punishment, of hell's hands dragging at her. She clung to him, weeping, but her eyes, wild and red-rimmed, kept darting toward the floor, as if she knew something stirred there. I should have felt pity. But when I stood behind her, comb in hand, watching her reflection tremble, I felt only power. She no longer struck me. She no longer mocked me. She trembled under my touch. I had become the unseen hand that ruled her nights, but fear lingered in me too. The doll no longer obeyed like a tool. It shifted in my hands, heavier some nights, lighter others, as if it breathed. Once I thought I heard it sigh. Another time when I pricked it with a pin, a drop of moisture beaded on the cloth, red as blood. I wiped it away, telling myself it was only resin from the clay. But the truth hung in the air. The doll was no longer just mine. The swamp whispered clearer now. It called my name. In dreams, I walked into its waters deeper and deeper, until reeds wrapped my legs and hands reached from beneath the surface. They pulled me down, but I did not drown. Instead, I breathed the water, and it filled me with whispers, thousands of voices murmuring as one. Give more. Give more. I woke shaking, but when I touched the doll, it pulsed stronger, as if it had drunk from my dream. The servants grew restless. Some threatened to flee. Others clung tighter to their prayers. The mistress forbade anyone to leave, but her voice cracked, her authority slipping like sand through fingers. The house was no longer hers. It belonged to the whispers, to the shadows, to the thing that pulsed in my floorboard. One evening, as I prepared the doll again, I heard laughter echo down the hall. It was not hers. It was not any servant's. It was high, thin, and sharp, as though the house itself mocked us all. The lamps flickered. The walls groaned. I clutched the doll to my chest, whispering, "What are you?" The cloth felt hot, almost burning, and in that moment I swore it whispered back. And triumph flooded me all at once. If it was mine, then I was bound to it forever. If it lived, Then so did my anger, my hunger, my vengeance. The doll had become my shadow, my weapon, my curse. And though I feared what it was becoming, I could not turn away, because the truth was this: the mistress no longer ruled me. The doll did, and through it, perhaps, the swamp itself had begun to rule us all. The house once stood proud, its white boards gleaming in the sun, lanterns glowing like stars when night fell. Now it groaned with every breath, as though its bones were tired of holding so much fear. The walls creaked, the floors moaned, and every corner seemed to harbor a shadow that no lamp could chase away. The mistress no longer commanded the house. She was a prisoner within it. She stayed in her chambers, curtains drawn tight, lamps burning at all hours. Even with light, the darkness clung to her. She claimed shapes moved in the corners, that whispers filled the silence, that hands brushed her skin while she slept. Her cries tore through the halls nightly, waking every servant, shattering any hope of rest. I lay on my pallet and listened. At first her screams had filled me with a sense of victory. Now they shook me in a different way. Each cry seemed to stir the air, making the walls quiver, the floor beneath me tremble. The doll pulsed in time with her terror, as though it fed on it, grew from it. And I could not ignore the feeling that the house itself had begun to echo her fear, carrying it through every board and beam. The servants whispered of leaving, their voices low, furtive. "This place is cursed," one said. "The swamps come to claim it," said another, but none left. Chains bound some of us, debts bound others, and fear bound us all. The mistress forbade anyone to flee, her voice shrill, desperate. But her orders rang hollow. No one obeyed out of loyalty anymore. They stayed only because leaving felt as dangerous as staying. The preacher came again, his face drawn, his eyes dark. He carried more relics this time, crosses, holy water, pages torn from his Bible. He prayed louder, his words crashing against the wall. But the house answered him with groans and whispers, and the lamps flickered until he fell silent, sweat dripping down his brow. He left quickly after, refusing to meet my eyes. At night, the tremors grew worse. Doors slammed on their own. The staircase shuddered beneath unseen steps. Once the great chandelier in the parlor swayed though no breeze stirred. It creaked and moaned as if it might fall, and all of us who saw it froze, too afraid to move. When it stilled at last, the silence that followed was heavier than thunder. The mistress wasted away. Her gowns hung loose on her frail frame. She clawed at her sheets, muttering that something pressed on her chest at night, stealing her breath. She begged the servants not to leave her alone, but most refused. Those who did stay fled in terror before dawn, claiming the walls whispered their names. I tried to tell myself this was still my doing, that the doll in my floorboard held the reins, but the truth pressed in on me. I had opened a door, and something older, larger had stepped through. The swamp's whispers filled the house now, not just the night air outside. They slipped through cracks, through keyholes, through the very grain of the wood. One evening as I held the doll, I felt it twitch again. This time it turned its head slightly in my hand. My breath caught. I nearly dropped it, but my fingers clung tight. Its stitched face tilted toward me, lifeless yet alive, its blank eyes staring. I whispered, "A stop," though I knew cloth cannot hear. But the swamp could, and the swamp did not stop. That same night, the house shook as if a storm had struck it. Windows rattled, floorboards groaned, lamps toppled from their tables. The mistress shrieked, her voice piercing, and the servants scrambled like frightened birds. We huddled in corners, waiting for the shaking to end. But no storm raged outside. The night air was still, the swamp quiet. The tremor came from within. When silence returned, we all sat frozen, listening to the pounding of our own hearts. The mistress lay curled on her bed, rocking, whispering prayers that no one answered. The servants avoided her room altogether after that, crossing themselves whenever they passed the door. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the doll pressed to my chest. Its warmth seeped into me, its weight heavy as stone. The swamp whispered in my ears, louder than ever. "Amor," it said. Amor. The voice was not mine, not entirely. It belonged to something deeper, something that had claimed the house as surely as the mistress once had. I realized then that the house no longer trembled only from her fear. It trembled because it had become part of the swamp. Its walls were reeds, its floors were roots, its windows were eyes. The big house was no longer a place of men. It was alive, and it had begun to hunger. And I, the girl who had once been nothing more than hands combing hair, now lay bound to it by threads of cloth and whispers of water. I had stirred the swamp, and the swamp had answered. The house would never be the same. Fear spreads quicker than fire. It licked through the quarters, through the kitchens, through every hall of the big house. At first it was only the mistress who trembled, but soon every servant carried that tremor in their bones. The whispers that once curled only around her bed now drifted into every ear. None of us could escape them. The cook, a stout woman who once ruled her kitchen with laughter and iron spoons, grew silent. She chopped slowly, glancing over her shoulder as if the shadows behind her stove might rise up. The butler, always stiff and proper, began to drink from the bottles he used to polish. His hands shook when he tried to pour wine. Even the children in the quarters cried at night, swearing they heard footsteps pacing outside the walls. Whispers of leaving grew louder. "This place is cursed," one man said. "The swamp has come inside," another muttered, but no one left. Where could we go? Chains bound some of us, hunger bound others. Even those who were free feared stepping into the swamp at night. Better the haunted house, you know, than the darkness that swallows wanderers whole. The mistress's decline only deepened the servant's dread. She no longer rose from her bed. Her skin stretched thin. Her hair lost its shine. She muttered constantly, prayers and curses tumbling together in a cracked voice. Sometimes she called for her dead mother. Other times she shrieked at things no one else could see. One night, she clawed her arms until blood streaked her sheets, swearing invisible hands gripped her tight. The doctor tried to soothe her with tonics, but his face was pale as he fled. Even he would not stay the night anymore. Every sound turned strange. Doors slammed, though no one touched them. Windows rattled, though the air outside was still. The chandelier swayed again, groaning, until one of its crystals fell and shattered across the floor. The servants huddled together, whispering prayers in languages old and new. Their voices shook, and through it all, their eyes found me more often. They did not speak my name, but I felt their suspicion. I moved quietly, kept my face still, but inside I knew they sensed the fire in me, the thread that tied me to the mistress's unraveling. Perhaps they guessed. Perhaps they only feared what they could not name. Either way, their glances weighed heavy on my back. The preacher came yet again, brought by desperate pleas. He entered clutching his Bible so tightly his knuckles whitened. He sprinkled holy water until the air smelled of iron, raised his voice until it cracked. He commanded the evil to flee, his face twisted with fear. But the whispers did not stop. The house shuddered, the lamps guttered, and when he finished, silence pressed down so hard he left without a word. He did not return. The servants whispered that even God had abandoned the house. If God had fled, what chance did we have? Some clutched charms handed down by their mothers. Others burned sage until the air choked with smoke. A few muttered prayers from the old lands, songs carried across the sea. But nothing slowed the fear. The swamp was stronger. One night, I awoke to find 3 of the women huddled near the quarter's door. They were whispering of escape. One said she would rather face the swamp than another night in the big house. Another swore she had seen the doll, walking across the floor, its shadow stretching long in the lamplight. My heart pounded. How could they know? Had it slipped from my hands? Or had the swamp shown it to them, feeding on their fear? I pressed my back against the wall, silent, listening. At last they fell quiet, too afraid to leave, too afraid to stay. That was the truth of it. Fear had bound us tighter than chains ever could. The mistress screamed again that night. It was not her usual shriek of terror. It was a howl, long and raw, that shook the rafters. Every servant froze. Children cried. Dogs howled outside. The house trembled beneath us, and I felt the doll burn hot beneath the floorboard, as though alive with her agony. I should have been satisfied. This was what I had wanted, her broken, trembling, at the mercy of forces she could never command. But satisfaction soured into dread. Her suffering had become the suffering of everyone within those walls. No one slept, no one laughed, no one breathed easy. The big house had turned into a cage of fear, and I had forged its bars. The swamp whispered louder now. Its voice no longer blended with the wind. It spoke clear, sharp, filling my dreams. More, it urged, more. Sometimes I thought it spoke with many voices, sometimes with mine. It told me I was not finished, that the doll still hungered, that the house would not rest until all debts were paid. But whose debts? Hers alone, or mine as well? I began to see the truth I had tried to deny. The doll was not just hers. It was mine. Each pin tied me tighter to it. Each whisper stitched me closer. Her torment was my triumph, but also my chain. The servants feared her room, but I feared my own. Beneath my floorboard, the cloth figure waited, pulsing, breathing. Sometimes I thought it shifted when I was not looking. Sometimes I dreamed of its stitches coming undone, its scraps unfurling into something larger, darker, swallowing me whole. And still, I could not let it go. Because fear ruled the house, and fear made me strong. For the first time in my life, no hand struck me without trembling. No word cut me without stammering. I was feared, even if no one dared name it. And power, once tasted, is harder to surrender than life itself. The house trembled because of me. The servants trembled because of me. and I, trembling with them, could not decide if I was the curse or the cure. The mistress was fading, but even fading things sometimes flare before they die. She had spent weeks trembling, clutching her rosary until her fingers bled, praying until her voice cracked. Yet one evening, I saw something new in her eyes. Not strength, not courage, desperation sharpened into defiance. She summoned every servant to her chamber. Her once grand bedroom was dark, curtains pulled tight, candles scattered across every surface. Their flames wavered as though the air itself breathed unevenly. She sat upright in her bed, her face pale, her frame thin as a reed, but her voice carried with a force I had not heard in weeks. "You will not abandon me," she said, eyes darting to each of us. "This house is mine. This land is mine. And yes," she jabbed a trembling finger toward us, mine. "I will not be driven out by shadows, nor by whispers, nor by the devil himself." The servants shifted uneasily. No one dared speak. Some clutched charms in their pockets. Others bowed their heads. I kept my eyes low, though heat flared in my chest. Her words tried to claim us still, as if fear had not already loosened her hold. She ordered the butler to fetch every cross from the chapel. She commanded the cook to prepare holy bread, sprinkled with wine the preacher had left behind. She made the maids scrub her floors with water mixed with salt, their hands raw and red when they finished, and she forced all of us to kneel as she prayed aloud, her cracked voice demanding heaven's attention. But heaven stayed silent. The house groaned around us, its boards creaking in protest. One candle sputtered and died, then another, until shadows swallowed half the room. The mistress gripped her rosary tighter, shouting prayers until spittle flew from her lips. Her eyes rolled upward, white showing, as though she fought something none of us could see. When it ended, she collapsed against her pillows, gasping. The servants fled, muttering that she was mad, that her fight was against something far greater than she. Only I lingered, standing in the corner with my hands clenched tight. That night, I lifted the floorboard and brought out the doll. It felt heavier than ever, its cloth warm, its stitched face tilted just slightly toward me. I whispered her name and pressed a pin into its side. Far above, she cried out again, her voice sharp with pain. But then to my shock, her cry turned into laughter. It was not the laughter I remembered, sharp, mocking, cruel. It was broken, jagged, the laughter of someone who had lost all reason. The sound echoed through the halls, twisting until it no longer sounded human. Servants cowered in their quarters. Some wept, others prayed. Others prayed. I sat frozen, the doll burning in my hands, listening as her laughter turned to sobbing, then silence. The next morning, she rose from her bed. For the first time in weeks, she walked the halls. Her steps were slow, her frame frail, but her eyes burned with wild fire. She barked orders again, commanding us to work, to clean, to cook. The servants obeyed, trembling, but I saw the truth. She was not strong. She was clinging, clawing at the last scraps of power she could grasp. Still, her defiance unsettled me. The swamp whispered louder in my ears, urging me to finish it. "More," it said, "more." But I hesitated. Something in her ragged strength mirrored my own. She was unraveling, yes, but still fighting, and I wondered if she could fight against the swamp, could I? Her last stand grew wilder each day. She forced the servants to gather in her chamber nightly, making them kneel as she recited prayers. She sprinkled holy water over us, muttering that it would bind us to her. The cook refused one night, and the mistress struck her across the face with surprising force. Fear silenced every protest after that. The house trembled more violently, as though angered by her defiance. Windows rattled, doors slammed, walls groaned. Once a mirror shattered without touch, shards scattering across the floor. The mistress cried out that it was the devil testing her. I knew better. The swamp did not like being challenged. I held the doll close each night, torn between awe and dread. Its stitches seemed looser now, as if they strained to contain what stirred within. Its weight pressed against my chest like a living thing. I whispered her name, pressed pins into its limbs, and listened as her cries echoed through the halls. Yet still she rose each day, wild eyes flashing, prayers spilling from her cracked lips. Her defiance fed the fear of the servants. They whispered that she was possessed, that she no longer fought the devil but had become his vessel. Some refused to serve her, slipping away into corners of the house. Others clung tighter, believing obedience might shield them. And through it all, I watched. I had wanted her broken. I had wanted her powerless. Yet here she stood, trembling but unyielding, a shadow of the woman she once was, but still clinging to control. Her strength was a kind I had not expected, the strength of desperation, of someone who knows they are losing but refuses to fall quietly. The swamp whispered, "End her," but something inside me hesitated. Perhaps I feared what would happen when the doll claimed her completely. Perhaps I saw too much of myself in her last stand. We were bound together now, mistress and slave, tormentor and victim, both fighting shadows that had grown larger than us. That night, I dreamed of standing in her chamber, the doll in one hand, a pin in the other. She knelt before me, eyes hollow, begging. I pushed the pin deep, and the house shook so violently it split apart, beams snapping, walls crumbling. I woke with a start, breath ragged, hands clenched. The doll lay beside me, not beneath the floorboard where I had left it. Stitches stretched wide as though it had smiled. The mistress was not done yet, but neither was I. The swamp had always whispered, but now it roared. At night, when the house trembled and the mistress screamed, I felt its voice pressing against my skull, like water threatening to burst a dam. It no longer called from beyond the trees. It was in the walls, in the floors, in my breath. The servants whispered too, though their words were broken by fear. Some swore they saw moss creeping up the stair rails. Others claimed frogs croaked inside their beds, or snakes slithered through their dreams. A few said the swamp itself had moved closer, its black waters pressing against the fields, swallowing the land. I did not need their tales to know the truth. I felt it each time I held the doll. The swamp was claiming the house inch by inch. The mistress fought still, though her body wasted away. She walked the halls with wild eyes, clutching her rosary like a weapon. She barked prayers at shadows, thrust crosses into corners, demanded servants kneel at her side. They obeyed out of fear, not faith. Her power was a crumbling wall against a flood that would not be stopped. One evening I went to fetch water from the well. The moon hung low, casting silver across the yard. The swamp shimmered at the edges of the trees, darker than night itself. I swore I saw shapes moving in the water, faces rising just above the surface, eyes glinting, mouths opening in silent songs. My bucket slipped from my hands, splashing into the dirt. I froze, heart hammering, until the faces sank back into the black. When I returned, the doll burned against my chest, though I had not touched it. It pulsed in rhythm with my heart, or perhaps my heart had learned to beat in time with it. Either way, I knew. The swamp was no longer waiting. It had stepped inside me as surely as it had stepped inside the house. That night, the mistress gathered us all in her chamber again. She looked half dead already, her cheeks hollow, her hair limp, yet her voice cracked like a whip. "You will stand with me," she cried. "You will drive this devil out. This is my house, mine." The servants knelt reluctantly, murmuring prayers. I stayed in the back, my eyes fixed on the doll hidden beneath my shawl. Its stitches strained, its weight dragged at my arm. I felt it humming, alive, listening. The mistress raised her rosary high, shouting words I no longer cared to hear. The candles guttered. The room grew cold. Then came the sound, deep, low, rising from the floor itself. A groan, a rumble, as though the earth beneath the house had shifted. The servants gasped, clutching one another. The mistress shrieked and thrust her rosary toward the ceiling. The house shook. Plaster cracked. Dust rained from the rafters. The mirrors shattered in a chorus of glass. The swamp had answered. Panic scattered the servants. Some fled screaming into the halls. Others collapsed where they knelt, sobbing. The mistress remained, eyes blazing, screaming her prayers into the roar. I clutched the doll, trembling, feeling its heat sear through me. The swamp whispered clear in my ear, "She is mine." But the mistress fought. For all her cruelty, for all her sins, she clung to her faith with desperate claws. Her voice cracked, her body shook. Yet still she shouted, defying the swamp, defying me, defying the shadows that filled her room. I pressed a pin deep into the doll's chest. She screamed, folding in on herself, writhing on her bed. Her rosary clattered to the floor, beads scattering like seeds. The servants who remained fled, unable to watch. Her screams turned to sobs, then to ragged laughter, the same broken sound that haunted the halls. And still, the house shook. The swamp's voice rose higher, rushing like water through every beam and board. "More," it urged. "Finish it." I stood frozen. The doll burned in my hands, almost too hot to hold. The mistress writhed before me, pale and broken, yet unyielding in her madness. I could end it now, I knew. One more pin, one more whisper, and the swamp would claim her fully. But something inside me trembled. Not pity, not mercy, fear. If the swamp claimed her, what would it do next? Would it be satisfied, or would it reach for me, for all of us, for the whole house? The mistress's eyes met mine. For a moment, clarity flickered there. Piercing through the madness, she whispered, "You!" Her voice cracked, soft but sure. It was you. My chest tightened. I wanted to deny it, but the doll throbbed in my arms, its stitches grinning wide. She knew, perhaps she had always known. Her hand reached out, trembling, clawing at the air between us. I stepped back, clutching the doll tighter. Her lips moved again, words lost beneath the roar of the swamp. Then her body stiffened, her back arched, and she collapsed onto the bed, silent. The room fell quiet. The trembling stopped. The swamp's voice faded to a whisper, then silence. The candles flickered steady once more. The servants crept back, eyes wide, breaths held. They stared at her, still form, then at me. No one spoke. I stood with the doll pressed to my chest, its warmth fading, its stitches slack. For the first time, it felt like only cloth again. But deep inside, I knew the truth. The swamp had not retreated. It had only paused. It had claimed her, yes, but it had also claimed more. It had claimed the house, and it had claimed me, and it had claimed... The house was quiet after her fall, but it was not peace. It was the stillness that comes after thunder, when the air hangs heavy, waiting for the next strike. The mistress lay in her chamber, pale and lifeless, her rosary scattered across the floor like broken teeth. The servants whispered she was dead, but I knew better. Death leaves a body empty. She was not empty, she was claimed. They buried her the next day. The preacher refused to come, so the butler recited the words, his voice trembling. The coffin was lowered into the ground behind the chapel, earth thrown hastily over it. No one lingered to pray. Everyone wanted distance from her, from the house, from the swamp that seemed to watch us all. I stood at the edge of the crowd, the doll hidden beneath my shawl. Its stitches were slack, its cloth cold, but I did not trust it. Sometimes I thought I saw its head tilt when I wasn't looking. Sometimes I swore I heard faint laughter rising from its seams. I kept it close, fearing what might happen if I left it behind. That night, the house should have been free. But it trembled more fiercely than ever. Doors slammed, shutters rattled, walls groaned as if the earth itself pushed against them. The servants screamed, clutching one another, begging me with their eyes, though they did not speak aloud. They knew. They had always known. The swamp's whispers filled me. They did not plead any more. They commanded more. It was not enough to claim her. The house, the land, the blood, all of it belonged to the swamp now, and I was its vessel. I tried to resist. I pressed the doll beneath the floorboard, shoved it deep, covered it with rags. I told myself I would not touch it again, but sleep did not come. My dreams writhed with shadows, with her pale face grinning through broken stitches, with water rising over the house until only the roof remained. I woke drenched in sweat, my hands clutching at the empty air where the doll should have been. When I checked, it lay beside me on the pallet waiting. The servants began to vanish. One by one, they slipped away into the night. Some tried to flee across the fields, others into the swamp. None returned. Their absence left the halls emptier, darker, yet the whispers grew louder still. The swamp was not content with the mistress. It wanted them all, and it wanted me. One evening, as I scrubbed the floor of the great hall, I felt water seep through the boards beneath my knees. At first I thought it was spilled from my bucket, but the bucket was dry. The water was dark, smelling of moss and rot. It spread in a thin line, curling like fingers across the wood. My heart seized. I leapt back, but the water stopped, as if laughing at my fear. When I blinked, it was gone. I ran to the quarters, shaking, clutching the doll. I begged the swamp aloud to leave me, to take what it wanted, and let me be. But the whispers only grew clearer. You open the door. You cannot close it. That night, thunder rolled without lightning, deep and low, shaking the walls. The house quivered like a beast in pain. I sat clutching the doll, rocking as though it were a child, whispering to it, begging it to sleep. But its stitches stretched, its cloth pulsed, and I felt breath move against my hand. Then I heard her, the mistress. Her voice cracked and broken, drifting down the hall. A girl, she called. A girl. My blood ran cold. She was buried. I had seen her coffin lowered into the earth, yet her voice echoed, closer and closer, until I swore she stood just beyond my door. I pressed the doll tight to my chest, trembling. The door creaked. Shadows moved beneath it, and her laughter spilled through, the same jagged sound that had haunted the nights before she fell. I knew then the swamp had not simply claimed her. It had bound her to me, as it had bound me to the doll, as it had bound the house to its dark heart. She was not gone. She was with me always. The servants who remained huddled together, too terrified to speak. They avoided me, their eyes wide, their bodies pressed against walls when I passed. They knew I carried the curse. They feared the doll, though they had never touched it. And still none dared confront me. Fear is a tighter chain than iron. The swamp pressed harder. Its whispers turned into words I could no longer ignore. Bring them, it said. Bring them all. It wanted every soul within the house. It wanted the land drenched in fear until no laughter, no prayer, no song could break it. But I hesitated. For all the pain I had suffered, for all the cruelty I had endured, I was still flesh, still heart. I could not bring myself to finish what I had begun. I told myself I had only wanted her to suffer, only her. But the swamp does not bargain. It does not stop. It devours. That night I stood in the parlor, doll in hand. The fire burned low, casting long shadows across the walls. The house trembled around me, dust falling from the ceiling like ash. I pressed a pin into the doll's hand, and somewhere in the walls the mistress's voice shrieked. I pressed another into its leg, and the floor groaned, splitting with a crack. The swamp surged through me, powerful, endless. I felt like a god. Yet I also felt hollow, as though each pin took not only from her but from me. My body ached, my breath came ragged, and my hands shook. The reckoning had come, not for her, not for the servants, for me. I had opened the door, I had called the swamp, I had bound myself to cloth and stitches. And now no prayer, no charm, no silence could unbind me. The house would fall, the swamp would rise, and I would either stand with it or drown beneath it. The swamp does not wait forever. It had whispered, it had tugged, it had pressed its damp breath against the house until every beam bent beneath it. But on the final night, it did not whisper, it roared. The air was heavy, wet as though rain had already fallen, though the sky was clear. The servants who remained, only a handful now, huddled together, eyes darting, lips moving in prayers that no longer held weight. They knew the end was near. I knew it too. The house shuddered from dusk onward. Every board groaned. Every window rattled. Every candle guttered, though no wind stirred. The walls sweated with moisture, streaks of moss crawling upward as though the swamp itself had pushed its fingers through the cracks. The air smelled of rot and stagnant water. I could taste the swamp on my tongue. I carried the doll with me, pressed against my chest. Its weight had grown unbearable, its cloth damp as though it had been dipped in the black water outside. Its stitches strained, threads pulling loose, and beneath them something shifted. I feared what would emerge if the threads snapped. The mistress's laughter filled the halls, though her body lay buried in the earth. Sometimes it came from the parlor, sometimes from the stairs, sometimes from right behind me. The servants wept, begging me to tell them what to do. But what could I say? I had loosed this thing, and now it was hungrier than all of us combined. Night fell without stars. The moon hid behind thick clouds, and the swamp swallowed every sound beyond the house. Only the croaking of frogs and the hiss of unseen creatures seeped through the shutters. The final night had come. The butler, his face pale as ash, gathered the servants in the great hall. He held a lantern high, his voice shaking. "We must leave now," he said. "The house is lost." But no one moved. Fear bound us tighter than nails. Where could we go? The swamp surrounded us, and it wanted us all. I stood apart, clutching the doll. My breath came heavy, my heart pounding in rhythm with its pulse. Yes, it pulsed. I could feel it beneath the stitches. It beat like a second heart, tied to mine, tied to hers, tied to the swamp itself. Then the ground shook, not a tremor, not a quiver. The earth itself convulsed. The walls split, plaster raining down. The chandelier crashed to the floor, shards scattering like stars. The servants screamed, rushing in every direction. Some fled up the stairs, others into the kitchen, anywhere that was not here. But there was no safety left. I fell to my knees, clutching the doll as the swamp surged through the boards. Water bubbled up from beneath the floor, black and slick, spreading fast. It carried with it the stink of rot, the voices of the dead, the laughter of the mistress. The swamp had come for its claim. The butler slipped, his lantern falling, flames licking across the wet floor. But the water snuffed it out before it could spread. The darkness swallowed us whole, lit only by the faint glow of candles trembling on the walls. The swamp whispered in every voice I had ever known. My mother's soft and broken, the old woman's low and steady, the mistress's sharp and cruel, and my own echoing back at me. More, give more. I rose, holding the doll high. Its stitches gaped, its cloth writhing as though something inside clawed to be free. The servants froze, staring their eyes wide with terror. They knew then without question, I was the source, the vessel, the key. The mistress's laughter burst from every corner, rattling the windows, shaking the walls. I pressed a pin into the doll's chest, and the house convulsed. Beams snapped, glass shattered, water poured faster through the cracks. The servants shrieked, some collapsing to their knees, others clawing at the doors that would not open. I pressed another pin into its leg, and the staircase split down the middle, splinters flying. I pressed another into its hand, and the walls wept black water. The swamp's power surged through me, burning, blinding, endless. For a moment, I felt like a god. But gods do not bleed, and I did. My nose trickled red, my arms ached, my chest heaved as though each breath tore me open. The swamp's power was not mine to wield. It was only borrowed, and the debt would come due. The servants screamed for mercy, but none came. The swamp did not know mercy. It knew hunger. It wanted every voice silenced, every wall drowned, every soul claimed. I stumbled into the mistress's chamber. Her bed lay empty, sheets tangled, pillows damp, yet her presence pressed heavier than ever. Her laughter rattled the bed frame, echoed from the cracked mirror, spilled from the floorboards. I dropped to my knees, clutching the doll. "Is this what you wanted?" I cried, my voice breaking. "Well, is this what you made me?" The swamp answered with silence, then with a roar that split the walls wide. Water poured in, black and endless, rising fast. The floor buckled beneath me. The house screamed like a dying beast. I held the doll high one last time. Its stitches split, threads snapping, a glow seeping from within. A face flickered in the light, the mistress's twisted and grinning, my own hollow and broken, the swamp's endless and dark, all three bound together. With a scream, I drove the final pin into its heart. The house convulsed, walls collapsing, beams crashing, water surged, swallowing everything. The halls, the rooms, the screams of the servants. The mistress's laughter rose high, then cut short, replaced by silence so deep it pressed against my skull. I sank beneath the water, the doll dissolving in my hands, its cloth unraveling into nothing. The swamp's voice whispered one last time, "You are mine," and then darkness. The water swallowed the house without hurry, like a patient mouth closing around something it would not forget. I felt it first as cold and then as weight, a pressure that wrapped my limbs and held them still. The big beams cracked and sighed. I clung to a splintered post as the roof collapsed in a thunder of timber. The doll's last thread slipped slow through my fingers and dissolved into the black water. For an hour that might have been a day, I floated between the slow world and a faster one. Faces moved under the surface. Some I knew, some I had only heard of in whispers. The servant who once shared my bread drifted by, face pale and empty. The preacher's Bible floated open to a psalm that had not saved us. The butler's lantern drifted, half bright, its light dying as if it had no will left. I thought I would feel relief, but the silence that followed was a hard, clear thing that showed me my shape. I looked at myself and did not know the girl who had once combed a woman's hair. The hunger that had lived like a coal in my chest lay now like ash that clung to skin. The swamp's voice was new and near. It braided the old woman's low cautions with my mother's lullabies and the mistress's cruel laugh, and it made a single song of all of it. When the water sloughed us out beyond the porch, I clung to drifting boards until a skiff came and took me. A young man with a rope and rough hands pulled me aboard. He did not ask my name. He wrapped a sail around my shoulders and handed me something that tasted like fire and mercy. For the first time in a long while, I slept without the doll's weight. The village that took me in looked at me as if I wore a shadow. Women mended my clothes. A child left bread on the windowsill. I learned to breathe in air that did not taste of rot. Yet at night, the swamp's whisper visited me. It was softer now, patient and certain. "We remember," it said, as if the marsh kept ledgers of all debts. People told the story in the market and at the tavern in the years that followed. They called it a caution. Do not stir what sleeps in the bayou. Some called me witch. Others called me cruel. Some said I was damned. Names are small things to a thing like the swamp. They tried to pin me with meaning so the world could feel safer. I tried to explain once to a woman who had lost a brother to the water. I told her of the old woman's teachings of hair and thread and the way a scrap of cloth carries a person-like scent. I told her how a little pin can find a lot of life. Her eyes went flat with something like understanding. Then she turned away. The story wanted to be simpler than the truth. And the truth. It wanted blame to land neat and fast. I lived on at the edge of things, where mud becomes earth and reeds refuse to die. I learned small mercies. I mended a child's sleeve and fed an old man's stew. I tended a neighbor's garden and pulled weeds until the soil looked honest. These were slow payments for a debt the swamp would not cancel. I thought perhaps tending the small good could balance the wide harm. At night I would walk down to the water. The bayou kept its memories like stones under the mud. Sometimes it would show me faces briefly. My mother's laugh, the old woman's crooked smile, the mistress's mocking curl of mouth. Once I saw the doll's stitches in a ripple, then nothing. The water remembers everything and forgives few things. Once a boy with a flatboat stopped and traded for old nails and a brass knob he found among the drift. He asked me if the plantation had been haunted, and laughed at his own question. I wanted to tell him everything, to make him hear how careful small acts must be. Instead, I told him only this. The swamp keeps its own accounts. He shrugged and pushed off, the oars making soft, quick noises that meant leaving. Sometimes I think the swamp speaks to me still, but not in the same hungry way. It reminds me, tend the roots you plant. I haul wood, mend fences, help with births when women have no midwife. I listen more than I speak. I learn the value of small, steady work. It is not repentance, it is habit, and habits, even small ones, change a person. People bring me scraps, now buttons, bits of ribbon, things they find by the marsh. They say it is for luck or for me to bless. I take them and tie them into knots and bury them in the garden. Perhaps the knots are my apology. Perhaps they are only another ritual. The old woman's voice sits with me like an old companion. Tend what you plant, she says, and I obey. On some evenings when the sky is thick and low, children dare each other to run to the stump that is all that remains of the porch and shout into the reeds. They ask the bayou to spit up ghosts. Sometimes the water answers with only a ripple. Sometimes the air holds its breath. I watch from across the marsh, hands in the pockets of a patched apron, and the sight makes a hollow ache in my ribs. If they ask the tale, I tell it in small measures. I speak of a house that a swamp ate, of a woman who combed hair and made a choice, and of a doll that carried more than cloth. I leave out the moments I relished, the first tiny warmth of power, because that admission does not help anyone. I speak instead of caution and of keeping hands gentle. Occasionally, when the moon is thin and the reeds whisper like old tongues, I hear a voice that could be forgiveness or could be hunger. It says my name like a promise and asks me to remember. I answer in a whisper of my own. I remember. We have an arrangement now. The swamp remembers, and I tend. It does not erase what I did. It keeps accounts. I keep paying. In the end, the house sank, the mistress was taken, and the doll unmade. The price I paid was not a single night, but a life of slow reckoning. If you ever walk the bayou's edge and feel a chill that has nothing to do with weather, know this: the swamp keeps what you give it. It will not forget. And sometimes when the wind moves just so, you may hear a thin voice carried low over the reeds that sounds like a woman saying, "I understand now." Oh, I whisper this warning softly. The swamp remembers, and it never forgives a hand that takes. Be wary, stranger.